Usually when we talk about a map, there is this expectation of precision. You look at a solid black line on a piece of paper.
Right, like a state border or something.
Exactly, a state border.
Yeah.
And you expect it to actually mean something physical. You expect a river or a mountain range or a canyon, something that physically forces you to acknowledge that you're moving from one distinct place to another.
Which totally makes sense because, I mean, historically, borders were geographic. They were these tangible barriers you physically had to cross.
Right. But then, you step into the world of housing policy, and suddenly you realize that the most important lines on the map are completely invisible.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, imagine for a second that you're standing on State Street in Bristol, right in the heart of the Tri-Cities area. You have one foot in Tennessee. You have your other foot in Virginia.
Yeah.
You look down, and the pavement looks exactly the same. You look up, the sky is the same. The coffee shops look the same.
But the physical environment, I mean, even though it's identical, the legal and economic reality you are standing in is entirely different depending on which foot you shift your weight to.
It's wild.
It really is. That border, as invisible as it is on the ground, it basically creates the absolute definition of a policy laboratory.
And that is exactly our mission for this deep dive. Today, we are exploring the incredibly complex and honestly rapidly shifting landscape of housing affordability.
Yeah, and we've got a lot of ground to cover.
We do. We are pulling insights from a massive stack of sources today. We've got 2026 legislative wrap-ups from the Virginia Housing Alliance and Think Tennessee, some local reporting from WPLN, case studies, and federal updates on the newly enacted 21st Century Road to Housing Act.
It's a huge stack of data.
It is. But we are going to filter all of that information specifically for you, our listener, and your interest in the Tri-Cities area of Tennessee and Virginia. Because this region straddles the border so perfectly, it serves as the ultimate real-world laboratory to see how two neighboring states and the federal government are taking wildly different approaches to solve the exact same housing crisis.
Right. The contrast is what makes it so fascinating.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because before we can even talk about who can afford to buy or rent a home, we have to look at the baseline, right? We have to look at what is legally allowed to be built on the land itself. We need to talk about zoning.
Yeah, zoning is the fundamental rule book of the whole housing discussion. I mean, nothing happens without it.
Right.
And right now, Virginia is essentially completely rewriting its rule book by issuing top-down mandates from the state level.
So overriding the local towns.
Exactly. So under a newly passed law, SB 531, which takes full effect by July 2027, all localities in Virginia are basically required to allow accessory dwelling units.
Or ADUs, as they're usually called. Let me just stop you there to make sure we have the terminology right. When we say accessory dwelling unit, we are talking about things like a garage apartment, a backyard cottage, an in-law suite, right?
Right, exactly.
Just a secondary, smaller living space on the exact same lot as a primary house.
That is the exact definition. Now, historically, local zoning boards had total control over these.
Right. They could just say no.
Yeah. A homeowner might want to build a backyard cottage for their aging parent, but the local board could simply deny it. Or, they could bury the homeowner in so much red tape that they just gave up.
Which happens all the time.
Constantly.
Yeah.
But Virginia's state government is now stepping in and overriding that local control. The state is saying, hey, if you own a single-family lot, you have the fundamental right to build an ADU.
Wow.
Furthermore, they're strictly capping what local governments can charge for the permit at $500.
Oh, to stop them from pricing people out with fees.
Exactly. And prohibiting them from slapping the property owner with unreasonable property line setbacks just to make the build geographically impossible.
That feels like a massive shift in power from the city council directly back to the property owner. But reading through the sources, Virginia is going even further than just backyard cottages, right? They are completely changing the rules around manufactured housing.
They are, and this is where the economics just become impossible to ignore. The state has mandated that manufactured homes under HB 655 and SB 346 must be permitted in all single-family zones.
Wow.
Yeah, the law forces local municipalities to treat a factory-built home equally to a traditional site-built home.
Which carries a lot of old stigmas, right? I mean, I think when a lot of people hear the phrase manufactured housing, they immediately picture like a dilapidated 1970s trailer park on the industrial edge of town.
Sure, the stigma is definitely real, but the reality of modern factory-built housing is completely different today. These are structurally sound, highly efficient homes built-in climate-controlled facilities.
Right, they aren't just tin boxes anymore.
Yeah. Not at all. And more importantly, the price difference is just staggering. According to the data in our stack, a modern manufactured home costs anywhere from $120,000 to $180,000.
Okay.
Now, if you compare that to $300,000 to $400,000 for a traditional site-built home, you can see why the state is aggressively pushing this.
So you literally can't just zone them away to the edge of town anymore. If a lot is zoned for a single-family house, a buyer can drop a factory-built home right onto it.
That is the new reality in Virginia. And the market is already responding to this legislative mandate. Virginia built over 1,500 manufactured homes in 2025 alone.
That's a huge jump.
It is. And to meet the expected surge in demand created by this new zoning parity, companies like Cavco are actively expanding their massive manufacturing footprints, specifically in places like Rocky Mount, Virginia.
It makes sense. I always thought about zoning like an invisible cookie cutter pressing down on a city, you know?
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it.
It doesn't just gently suggest what goes where. It physically forces neighborhoods to take a very specific shape, size, and density. So Virginia is basically taking the cookie cutter away from the local towns and handing a standardized one to the whole state.
Exactly.
But if you walk across State Street into Tennessee, the philosophy flips completely. If Tennessee's approach relies on voluntary incentives, doesn't a statewide mandate like Virginia's risk a one-size-fits-all problem for local communities?
What's fascinating here is that both states are actually trying to solve the exact same underlying problem, which is NIMBYism, right? The not-in-my-backyard opposition to new housing.
Right, the endless local town halls.
Yeah, local residents often fight new developments, which freezes the housing supply. Virginia and Tennessee are just using entirely different levers to bypass that local opposition. Virginia is using the mandate lever. Tennessee is using the incentive lever.
Okay, break that down for me.
So Tennessee passed legislation giving local jurisdictions the explicit ability to provide voluntary zoning incentives to builders.
So instead of a mandate, it's a carrot. Like, we will let you build this if you do this.
Exactly. A local government in Tennessee can now sit down with a developer and say, hey, we will let you build at a much higher density than the cookie cutter normally allows, or we will drastically reduce the number of parking spaces you're legally required to pave in exchange for you guaranteeing that a certain percentage of your units will have affordable rents.
Which keeps the power localized.
It does. And when you look at the case studies in our stack, like the recent changes in Memphis, this localized approach can actually unlock significant housing supply.
Let's dig into that Think Tennessee case study on Memphis, because they tackled something called missing middle housing, which I found fascinating.
Yeah, so missing middle housing refers to the kinds of buildings that sit comfortably between a sprawling single-family home and a massive high-rise apartment complex.
Right, the in-between stuff.
Exactly. We're talking about duplexes, triplexes, small walk-up apartment buildings, the exact types of homes that used to be built organically all the time before modern zoning basically made them illegal to construct in most single-family neighborhoods. So Memphis implemented a massive code reform to bring them back. They started allowing 3 to 6 unit buildings to be reviewed under residential building codes rather than commercial building codes.
Walk me through the mechanics of that. I mean, why does it matter if a triplex is classified as commercial versus residential? It's all just wood, pipes, and wires, isn't it?
It matters deeply because commercial building codes carry enormous structural and engineering burdens.
Like what?
Well, if a city classifies a 4-unit building as commercial, the developer suddenly has to comply with rules designed for strip malls or office buildings. They might have to install incredibly expensive, high-capacity fire suppression sprinkler systems.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and they might even have to upgrade the municipal water lines feeding into the property just to support the pressure for those sprinklers.
Which would kill the budget for a small project.
Exactly. So by reclassifying these small buildings as residential and specifically removing sprinkler requirements for certain triplexes and quadplexes under 5,000 square feet, Memphis drastically lowered the cost of construction. They made building the missing middle mathematically possible again.
That's super smart. But reading through these legislative wrap-ups, it is clear that Tennessee's localized approach definitely has its own growing pains. There is some serious friction between the state and local governments over Who gets to control that invisible cookie cutter?
Oh, there is a very intense tug of war happening. The most striking example in our sources is a recently withdrawn Tennessee bill sponsored by Representative Tim Hicks.
Right, who is the housing developer himself, if I remember correctly.
He is, and his proposed legislation would have allowed property owners to literally sue local governments for lost property value if the city passed new land use regulations that restricted what they could do with their land.
Wait, really? So if a city looks at a parcel of land and says, we are zoning this to prevent a massive apartment complex because the local infrastructure can't handle the traffic, the developer could sue the city for the hypothetical money they would have made if they had been allowed to build it.
That was the exact fear expressed by city planners and local officials. The bill ultimately did not move forward, but the fact that it was introduced perfectly illustrates the high stakes and the tension in Tennessee over who truly dictates land use.
Man, that's intense. Okay, so we have a solid grasp on what can be built on either side of the border. We have state mandates in Virginia and incentivized flexibility in Tennessee, but housing doesn't just spontaneously generate out of thin air just because the zoning code allows it.
Definitely not.
We need to follow the money. We need to examine the financial architecture. I mean, who is actually buying and funding these homes?
Building requires massive amounts of capital up front. So let's start with how we incentivize the builders themselves to take on that risk. Tennessee has been very aggressive with financial maneuvers to make affordable development appealing. One of the most significant changes is a law, HB 753 and SB 539, that specifically excludes the value of federal low-income housing tax credits, or LIHTC, from local property tax assessments.
Okay, explain the mechanics of this to me. How does a federal tax credit end up punishing a builder on their local property tax bill? It sounds like two completely disconnected things.
It comes down to how local governments assess the value of a building to calculate property taxes. So imagine a developer builds an affordable housing complex. By law, to keep it affordable, their rental income is strictly capped. They cannot charge the high market rates you might see downtown.
Right, that's the trade-off.
But to help fund the construction, the federal government gives them tax credits. Historically, some local tax assessors in Tennessee were looking at those federal tax credits and saying, well, those credits have financial value to you, so we are going to add that value to the appraisal of your building and tax your property as if it were a highly profitable market rate complex.
Which completely ruins the math for the developer.
Exactly.
I mean, you are forcing them to charge low rent, but handing them a massive property tax bill based on the value of the subsidy that helped them build it in the first place.
Precisely. It was a mathematical trap. So Tennessee changed the law to align with 40 other states, ensuring those federal tax credits are not penalized by local property tax assessments. It repairs the math and makes affordable development viable.
That makes a lot of sense.
On top of that, Tennessee established a $20 million Community Workforce Housing Innovation Pilot Program administered by the state's Housing Development Agency. This specifically targets middle-income and essential workers in high-growth areas, recognizing that the private market alone just isn't building for the middle class.
But even with tax credits and pilot programs, developers need buyers. They need deep pockets to step in and write the checks. Which brings us to, honestly, the elephant in the room. Institutional investors, corporate landlords.
Yeah, this is undoubtedly one of the most fiercely debated topics in our sources, and the arguments are highly polarized.
For sure.
Some market analysts argue that massive institutional capital is absolutely necessary to fund large-scale housing operations and bring new supply to the market quickly. But on the other side, housing advocates argue that heavily capitalized hedge funds buying up single-family homes is fundamentally destroying the ability of the average family to achieve homeownership.
It's self-balance.
It is. Looking strictly at the legislative outcomes, Tennessee is maintaining a fairly open market. Attempts to curb corporate landlords failed this legislative session.
What kind of attempts?
Well, for instance, the Homes Not Hedge Funds Act, which would have restricted institutional buyers from purchasing more than 100 single-family homes for rental purposes in large counties, it did not pass the House. Another bill aimed at stopping what critics call rent rigging via algorithmic pricing platforms like RealPage also failed to advance.
So Tennessee remains a hospitable environment for institutional capital. But the rules of the game are shifting at the federal level. We have to talk about this massive new federal law, the 21st Century Road to Housing Act.
We do. This is a sweeping piece of bipartisan federal legislation that was just enacted, Procedurally, it is worth noting that it became law automatically after President Trump declined to sign it, allowing it to take effect without his signature.
Here's where it gets really interesting,
Hmm.
because the federal government is taking a very specific, almost surgical approach to this corporate landlord debate. They aren't just banning institutional investors outright, but they're trying to radically redirect their behavior.
That is the core strategy of the legislation.
So,
The Road to Housing Act actively limits institutional investors from purchasing existing single-family homes.
so
The stated goal here is to sever the direct competition. They want to ensure that a regular, everyday home buyer looking for a starter home isn't getting into a bidding war against a Wall Street firm with billions of dollars in liquid capital.
right.
But, and this is a crucial distinction, the law intentionally preserves all the financial incentives for these exact same corporate firms to invest their capital into new housing construction.
Okay, I have to push back here. It sounds like the federal government is trying to thread a microscopic needle. They want the deep pockets of Wall Street to fund and build completely new neighborhoods, adding to the overall supply, but they want to lock them out of buying up the existing houses on the block. Is a behavioral shift of that magnitude actually enforceable?
The enforcement mechanism is the great experiment of this legislation. The entire structure of the law is designed to create a walled garden.
Right.
It penalizes the acquisition of existing stock while offering tax benefits and streamlined processes for new creation. If it works, it theoretically solves the supply shortage without cannibalizing the homes that are currently available to first-time buyers.
That's fascinating.
And to sweeten the deal on the creation side, the act includes an innovation fund, bringing $200 million annually in competitive grants directly to communities that are actively increasing their housing supply.
Okay, so we have covered the zoning, the builders, the buyers, and the hedge funds. Let's shift our focus to the people actually living inside these units.
The tenant.
Exactly. Let's go back to our listener in the Tricities. If you live in a rental house in Bristol, Tennessee, and you decide to pack up and move to a rental house just a few miles away in Bristol, Virginia, how does your day-to-day reality change in 2026?
Your reality changes drastically because the tenant protections are vastly different. Virginia has implemented sweeping, fundamental changes to the Virginia Residential Landlord and Tenant Act.
Like what?
Well, effective July 1st, 2026, the notice period a landlord must give a tenant for non-payment of rent jumps from 5 days to 14 days.
Wow. That is almost 2 entire extra weeks.
Yeah.
For a family living paycheck to paycheck, an extra 9 days to wait for a paycheck to clear, or to find a local assistance program, or even just to pack up their lives and find a new place to stay. I mean, that is a massive difference in stability.
It provides a significant buffer against immediate homelessness. And Virginia is also tightening the financial interactions between landlords and tenants. The state is prohibiting landlords from charging what they classify as junk payment processing fees.
Oh, that's huge.
Those fees are now strictly capped at the actual verified out-of-pocket cost the landlord pays to process the payment. Furthermore, landlords cannot charge a tenant for general maintenance or repair fees unless the landlord can definitively prove the damage was directly caused by the tenant violating the terms of the lease.
So if a 10-year-old water heater simply dies of old age in the middle of the night, the landlord cannot quietly sneak a maintenance fee onto the next month's rent bill to cover their plumbing costs.
Correct. The burden of routine property maintenance remains firmly on the property owner. And looking further ahead to July 2027, covered landlords in Virginia will be legally required to give 90 days written notice before they can increase the rent.
90 days. That's a lot of runway.
It is. Now, it should be noted that a more aggressive bill that would have granted localities the authority to implement actual rent stabilization or rent control did fail in the Virginia legislature. But the extended notice periods provide a much larger window for tenants to adapt to market changes.
Okay, so Virginia's approach is heavily focused on expanding the tenant's safety net and buffering them from sudden shocks. What does the renter experience look like on the Tennessee side?
Tennessee's approach is entirely different. Their legislative focus is almost entirely on market transparency and removing bureaucratic friction. For example, Tennessee passed the Landlord Transparency Act, which took effect January 1st, 2025.
What does that do?
This law requires landlords to provide clear, written contact information for the actual property owners, the property managers, and the maintenance services before a lease is even signed.
Why is a transparency law like that necessary? I mean, don't most people know who they are renting from?
Not in today's market. A huge percentage of rental properties are owned by anonymous LLCs. A tenant might be renting from a corporate entity registered to a P.O. box in Delaware.
Oh, right.
So when the roof starts leaking on a Saturday night, the tenant has no idea who is actually legally responsible for fixing it. The Transparency Act forces accountability by making the chain of command visible without dictating the actual financial terms of the lease itself.
That makes a lot of sense.
But perhaps the most radical change in Tennessee is SB 2237. This is a fascinating piece of legislation directly targeting the speed of development. It legally forces local governments to approve or deny development applications within 30 business days.
Wait, 30 days. In government time, 30 days is barely a blink of an eye.
Right.
What happens if the city planning office is understaffed or backed up and they simply miss the deadline?
If the local government misses that 30-day window, the project is automatically deemed approved by default, period.
Oh, wow.
And it goes further. If the government denies the application within those 30 days, they are legally required to refund the developer 50% of all the fees the developer paid during the review process.
That is astonishing. That fundamentally changes the entire power dynamic of urban development. It essentially turns city planning departments into, like, gig workers on a timer.
Yeah, it really does.
The state is punishing local governments financially if they slow down the building process. So what does this all mean?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you are seeing two fundamentally different philosophies on how to fix a broken housing market.
Right.
Virginia is focusing heavily on strengthening tenant safety nets, aggressively mandating new housing supply from the top down, and protecting the vulnerable from the immediate harsh realities of market forces.
And Tennessee.
Tennessee is focusing entirely on removing friction. They are betting on development speed, corporate transparency, and getting government bureaucracy out of the way so the private market can build its way out of the shortage as fast as possible.
It is incredible to see these two philosophies operating right next to each other. For you listening right now, whether you are prepping to speak at a local city council meeting, looking to buy your first home in the area, or just trying to understand why your neighborhood feels like it's rapidly changing, these aren't just abstract concepts debated in state capitals.
Absolutely not.
A 5-day versus a 14-day eviction notice, or waking up to find out your neighbor has the unquestionable legal right to build a 2-story apartment in their backyard, or a city council frantically approving a development because a 30-day timer is running out. That is a reality dictated purely by which side of that invisible line you live on.
Right.
The invisible cookie cutter of your town affects your daily life in profound ways.
And, as we talk about building all this new housing, streamlining permits, and bringing hundreds of thousands of new homes online, there is one final, almost hidden thread in our sources that I think we absolutely have to address.
Oh, what is that?
We are pushing for denser housing. We are treating manufactured homes like site-built homes to increase the human population density. But the sources quietly mention something else happening simultaneously.
I think I know exactly what you're going to say. We cannot talk about land use without talking about infrastructure.
Precisely. Virginia's new state budget includes a massive new tax on data centers, and the state is now strictly regulating their water usage, specifically mandating that they use recycled water or closed-loop cooling systems by 2027 in certain high-density areas.
Yeah, in Tennessee.
Meanwhile, Tennessee is also experiencing a rapid, explosive influx of these exact same data centers.
Right, because of the massive boom in artificial intelligence. These aren't just small server closets. We are talking about massive warehouse-sized server farms that run the modern internet, and they require staggering amounts of electricity and water to keep the servers from melting down.
Exactly. So here's the fundamental question we have to ask ourselves as we look at the future of this region.
Okay.
As we rush to build out the missing middle housing, as we aggressively expand the residential housing supply across the Tri-Cities and beyond to accommodate the human population, how will our local power grids and municipal water supplies handle the strain?
That's a huge issue.
It is. How do local governments balance the desperate need for human housing with the simultaneous explosive growth of these massive, resource-hungry data centers that are actively competing for the exact same plots of land, the exact same water pipelines, and the exact same electrical grid?
Feels like a massive collision course. The lines on the map might be invisible, but the physical competition for the water, the power, and the dirt under our feet is very, very real. It is something to keep your eye on as this region continues to grow. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep asking questions, keep looking at the map, and we'll catch you next time.